Patricia Francis, who chairs the Jamaican Trade Facilitation Agency. Also, Felipe Larraín, Vice President of Comun, and Road Ainawumi, who is head of the investment fund in Qatar. Welcome. Thank you all. Welcome to our panelists. Thank you, Felipe, for this very interesting presentation. A lot of issues there, a lot of food for thought that we will address during this panel. I want to remind our audience we have a QR code that will be displayed on the screen so that you can pose questions to the panelists as part of this discussion. I'll begin with Patricia.
Leadership positions throughout your career, and one of them is that you play a key role as chairman of the Trade Facilitation Task Force in Jamaica, bringing the private sector's perspective to guide regional integration efforts. Could you please share why trade facilitation is essential for business in the Caribbean, and what do you think are the 3 key priorities for regional cooperation in this area?
Thank you very much, Annabelle. Good afternoon, everyone. I think everyone knows that the Caribbean is a series of tiny islands that are sea-locked. You know, we like to talk about landlocked, but we are sea-locked, and therefore connectivity is a critical thing for us. Whether you're talking about sea or air, we certainly have to have that level of connectivity. And because we're small, we also have small economies, and therefore costs are higher. Trade facilitation, therefore, is critical if we're going to become more efficient and more effective. So I think, when we look at what the situation is now, it's really suboptimal. It's not what we ought to be if we really want to be, a cutting edge. So, for example, in Jamaica, we have 20 agencies at the border. And in a developed country, you may usually have 2. So you can imagine the confusion that happens in terms of the priorities that are being set and the kind of risk management that you need to have in order to prevent the kinds of delays that we have with permitting and so forth. So for me, the critical things are investment in digital trade, logistics, and regional policy alignment. Those are the 3 critical things. And if we take them one by one, we currently have 6 countries out of 14 that have electronic single windows. And we have another 4 that are in the process of putting electronic single windows in place. And we actually have an ambition for a regional single window, which would bring a level of connectivity for all of us in the Caribbean. Automated risk management, really critical if we're going to actually get the efficiency that we need. And why that's important is that with all of the various agencies that you have, you need to have a shared risk management platform. And that would actually lower the level of interventions. Because currently what happens is sometimes you have 3 or 4 agencies that are going to actually look at and inspect. Whereas we already have our customs that's automated, you have this inefficiency which is brought up because you have these other agencies that are not on board. So that's really critical and important. The kind of trade infrastructure that we're looking at, of course, port modernization, cold storage, that kind of thing. Inter-island connectivity. This is something which we talk a lot about and we need to get on with. And of course, trade logistics hubs. If we can get hubbing in the small islands, we'll be very much better off. And then simplification of policy. Right now we have different policies. We have, it's not all the same across all the islands in terms of things like food. And SPS and TBT kinds of so if we really follow through on trade facilitation measures, we could have that kind of harmonization, which would lower costs for business. It would create jobs and opportunities, and of course, it would improve our supply chains. And so if I think about what the IDB can do, which is, I think, what we're here about, I think that with private sector investment and yourself, we could look at building this platform which actually harmonizes our rules and regulations across the region. This would be huge. This would really be something which would be critically important. And I think, of course, we do need political leadership, and I'm glad to know that my minister is sitting in the room here, and he's listening to all of these conversations here, and he's a leader in the region. So, getting the region together to be able to have that kind of harmonization is really critical and important. And I think out of that, we could see an exponential change in how the Caribbean operates.
Thank you very much, Patricia. When I listen to you, and I think so many opportunities for us to continue to work together under the umbrella of our One Caribbean program, where precisely all these issues of promoting trade within the region, greater connectivity, regulatory harmonization are absolutely critical. So thank you very much for your remarks. Voy ahora a Bernardo. Me gustaría
Now, Bernardo, I would like to ask you, as a Chilean business leader in the private sector of our region, why do you believe that regional integration is key for the development of the business sector, and what measures do you think are important in order to expand it in a way that is effective? Thank you very much for the invitation to the IDB. Anabela, welcome to Chile. The region has enormous opportunities. They've been mentioned here. It's natural resources, the other critical minerals, lithium, copper, others, renewable energy. You mentioned it, Annabelle. Also, all types of packaging, bottling. We have natural plantations, green hydrogen, the real estate for the data centers with energy services, etc. There's enormous opportunity. Also, as Felipe was saying, the region can position itself well with the nearshoring demand that is emerging in North America. So there's enormous opportunities, and not just to develop these export sectors, more investment in all of these sectors that I mentioned, but also when it comes to creating ecosystems around our industries based on innovation, services, technology. Many times we see entrepreneurs in our region that are doing very interesting things, but you rarely see that around our exporting industries, as if there is an opposition there to that. So it's important to develop innovation ecosystems, services around our exporting industries. And unfortunately, that's not happening at the speed that the world demands. There's world demand. North America, through its nearshoring, has that demand, but we are not investing at the speed that we should be in these sectors. And you wonder why. And this has to do with integration and types of integration. We can debate about what's to be done on the private sector side, businesses or individual businesses. We can discuss how much more can be done in the public-private partnership sphere. But one of the limitations in the continent on this has to do with institutional deficiencies, regulatory deficiencies that are limiting the frontier of possibility. Economists say that you can move within that frontier toward the frontier with innovation, collaboration, and the rest. But when you run up to that edge, that frontier, because of regulation, then those regulations need to be addressed in terms of institutionality, environmental institutionality, which is what screens out investment. There's a lot of discretionality there, and that means that affects lithium projects in Chile or throughout the region. That limits the speed at which we can do this. Second, services. There are a lot of agencies that an investor must go through. There is a variety of windows. There isn't a single window to invest in Chile. I understand that one needs 500 permits if you look at a transmission line, a project that's being studied right now from North Chile to the central part of the country, there's talk of 5,000 permits in parallel. So that's important. Another regulatory institutional issue is the legal instruments needed in order to use the natural resources that belong to our citizens, minerals, water, marine resources, the coastline. That requires an instrument that provides investors with legal certainty, concessions, usage rights. There's some degree of uncertainty there for investors that need to look 20 years ahead of time in order to take on a mining project. And lastly, going to ecosystems, innovation ecosystems, is a role there for the public sector. The private sector is sometimes a little bit skeptical when it comes to the public sector about creating the conditions for these innovation, entrepreneurship ecosystems around our economies. But there is a role for the state to play, to be smart in enabling that development. Those are 4 regulatory examples, and I believe that integration, it applies to trade, to people, to investment, but as you've mentioned, it's also an opportunity to achieve regulatory convergence. It's tough to do so within countries individually. There's political interests, there's a lot at stake, but if these regulations were to be developed at the regional level with the IDB support, and then translate that into the country level, that could help to discuss reforms that have to be ambitious. This cannot be a minimalist approach to regulations. The issue of environmental permits in Chile requires an in-depth restructuring, and I think that's where integration can play a role to bring together visions from the public and private sector to identify the regulatory changes that our countries need in order to realize this enormous potential that we have. Thank you very much, Bernardo. Once again, the issue of regulatory differences, how that breaks up markets is, how it entails a cost. That's obviously an important in terms of the agenda for regional cooperation. Felipe, something you mentioned in your presentation, and this is very important as an agenda in our region, has to do with physical and digital connectivity as one of the significant challenges that we face in integration. What actions could you strategically could be taken in that field? Well, first of all, I'd like to share a thought here. There's 5, and we're overrepresented here in terms of our last name, but you're not related. Well, it's my adopted brother. It's a joke. As far as digital and physical connectivity, I feel that there are many things that should be done. It depends on the country, and here, these physical connections, energy connections, for example. I think the challenge is for our regional development banks, the CAF, the IDB. There are projects for interconnectivity that do not happen because there's political risk. They're not carried out because we say, well, there's going to be interconnections between countries where there's been differences or even armed conflicts in the past, and that makes things more complicated. But what happens if you have capital or credit intervene through a multilateral institution? I think there's a role to play there. And I think we are still at a very early stage when it comes to interconnection in Latin America. Digital interconnectivity, I think there are low levels of interconnection. Physical infrastructure, let's mention a practical example here. What we call the Atlantic Pacific corridor that goes through Brazil, Paraguay. It could eventually go through Bolivia or Chile. It's a transnational corridor. I think that's a big deal. These are things that do not happen elsewhere. And I want to tie your question to something that Patricia mentioned.
Yo creo que eso es un
Single windows, I think that's a very important issue, especially the idea of having single windows, not just nationally, but regionally. It's very helpful. I recall that as part of these agreements, I was part of the Pacific Alliance Foundation, and we used to speak of something that never happened, which is a regional single window. And the IDB has played a very important role when it comes to single windows, not just at the country level, that's very important. It's something that we implemented here under the Piñera administration. That's when we launched the single window. We called it the Interconnected System for Foreign Trade, the CISEX is what we called it back then. It's still there. But from that to think of a new stage where we can have links between the country's single windows, that's an enormous area of opportunity. Building on what you're saying, the support that the IDB has provided for single windows, and there are some parts where there has been progress. For example, there is interconnection in terms of authorized economic operators. These are mutually recognized by the countries, but there's a lot more that can be done there potentially. But I take note of that. Those are very important ideas. And just one final point here. Perhaps we can talk about this later. Interconnection and financial integration, of course. We have trade integrated through MILA between Colombia and Chile. In Chile, there's a lot that can be done in terms of financial interconnection in markets. So there's great potential there.
To you now, because non-regional partners play a crucial role in helping Latin America and Caribbean countries strengthen economic resilience, tackle shared challenges, and mobilize resources at scale. Qatar, through the Qatar Fund for Development, has been increasingly active in supporting trade, investment, and economic development globally. In the specific case of Latin America and the Caribbean, how could its engagement in the region be expanded?
Thank you so much for the question. Qatar Fund for Development believes that the non-regional actors like ourselves have an important role to do, not as a prescriber of solution, but also as actually an enabler and a collaborator with a shared vision towards the Latin America and driving a shared prosperity and also enabling resilience as well. Qatar engagement actually recently has been deepened within the region, and actually one of the strongest examples that we can share today is Qatar Fund for Development partnership with the Global Green Growth Institute. We started working with 6 Caribbean nations in helping small, medium enterprises focus on climate resilience and economic development opportunities and also fostering innovation. Qatar is really committed towards addressing the sustainable development goals, however, as well addressing challenges like climate change that transcend borders and inequality and other aspects. There are 5 key areas that Qatar is exploring to focus on, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, which I will shed the light on. One of them is scaling climate resilience and green innovation. We can deepen over our support for climate adaptation, ecosystem restoration, and also low-carbon entrepreneurship across more Latin American and the Caribbean countries, focusing on green job creation, investing in sustainable agriculture, and also supporting community-based resilience program. And one of the things that the fund is also focused on is the community-based identification of solution, where you don't impose in a country, but you actually learn from what this kind of solution is identified on the level of the community itself, and helping up in scaling. Another opportunities that we could focus on is actually strengthening regional economic integration. And here, as we seen globally, integration is not just a trade. And I focus here, as my colleagues, is focusing on is on connectivity. We are ready to actually support cross-border infrastructure project, energy and interconnectivity, and also in digital transformation, efforts to enhance regional and productivity and resilience. Another area is actually one of the things that we focus on as a fund. It is unlocking inclusive finance and private sector growth. We know this is the future. Through impact investment and blended finance, QFFD can help mobilize resources for underserved community, women and youth-led enterprises, and also smallholder farmers. Supporting regional and also financial innovation will be a key to scaling up sustainable economic inclusion. Another area we also touched upon, which is fostering knowledge exchange and also South-South cooperation. Qatar is committed actually to foster partnerships that go beyond funding, offering platforms for technical exchange, co-innovation, and also joint learning between institutions of the Gulf and also Latin America. Another area is co-investing, and this is one of the things that we highly focus on, because you cannot always go alone. Going with a collaborator like ourselves and also private sector can actually help us co-invest in public goods and also regional stability as well, from biodiversity, water security, and regional health, and also food system. QFFD is actually keen to collaborate with regional and multilateral partners to safeguard shared resources and also build a resilient society. And the emphasis here on the impact of the development and not just co-investing just to, for example, have a return. The return we focus on is a return of development towards the community that we serve. In all of this, our approach remains the same, tailored and also catalytic, and also grounded in the local priorities. We need to seek to lead, but to partner. We don't seek to lead, but to partner, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rhoda. I think one of the things that's very important for the IDB, in addition to mobilizing expertise, knowledge, and our own financing, is being able to work with partners like Qatar that can bring their own experiences to bear. They can bring their own sort of mobilization of resources, both public and private. So it's a great opportunity to have you here in this panel. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me turn to Felipe, Bernardo, and Patricia, and make a quick question to the three of you, because we already have some questions from the audience that I would like to turn on in a minute. But I'd like to ask you, what do you think, or what recommendations would you have to enhance public-private collaboration for sustainable integration across the region? Because we've been talking about here, the importance of private sector participation in integration efforts, how integration efforts can actually support the development of the private sector. So what recommendations do you have for supporting public-private collaboration? Patricia, you want to start?
Okay, thanks. Well, I think when we look at the challenge of the, now calling it war, and we're also looking at climate and these kinds of things, we really have to focus on, I think right now, at things that can actually make a difference to our competitiveness. And this, I see three things that are in front of us. One, the Trump administration is looking at imposing $1 million US per call for any company that has vessels, more than 50% of their vessels built in China. And if you go below that, 750,000 per call. And this is something which I think is going to have a huge impact, because the US only builds 5 large ships a year. And the size and the market is 1,300 per year, of which China is making at least 60 or 70% of those ships are built in China. So CGM CMA, which runs one of our terminals in Jamaica, they're looking at $20 billion over 4 years if these tariffs came in. So this is a huge thing that we are all facing. But I think, in terms of actions, there isn't much we can do but try to lobby as far as that's concerned. Other kinds of things like the industrial policy from the EU, which is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and also the IMO Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Strategy, all of which are looking at, beginning in 2027. These are things that we're facing now, which we have to take action on. So I think that if we look at both the carbon border and at the IMO rules, the IMO is looking at decarbonization of 20% by 2030 and by 70% by 2050. And near zero by 2050. So that's a huge challenge that we have in order to get to that level of decarbonization. And how is that going to impact us? That's going to impact us all by greater levels of costs that are going to be moving right down our value chains. And it's going to impact tourism, it's going to impact our food, it's going to impact everything. So those are things challenges that I think we have to look at, but what are the opportunities? And here, I think this is where the IDB and partners need to come in together to look at solutions. There are private sector companies that are currently working on providing zero carbon emission. You were talking about green hydrogen, those kinds of things. And so those companies exist. So there's a private sector group that are working in that regard. Then we have to look at policy. And what the challenge is that right across our region, there are different kinds of policies that exist. There's no harmonization. And if we want to see a real opportunity, that real opportunity would be economies of scale that one could create across the region if we had harmonization of the policies, or that we could attract businesses that could go, right across the region. So I think that that's something that IDB can play a real role in. I know you've been working in Jamaica for sure on this whole question of the energy transition. But when we think about what that opportunity is, we have tourist ships coming in right across the region. This is a big, big thing for us. They need to plug in. They also need, our ports also need to become decarbonized. So there is a huge opportunity there for both private and public sector for this kind of relationship, public-private partnerships, in order to solve the problems that currently exist with respect to policy, in order to attract the right kind of investment coming in and make this opportunity work for us. So it's both, trade and tourism, big, big opportunity, but also big, big challenge if we don't get the policy framework right.
Great, thank you, Patricia. Bernardo, Felipe,
Bernardo or Felipe, your ideas on public-private coordination to promote integration, Fernando?
Bueno,
Well, in the sectors that I mentioned, where our region has great potential, public-private collaboration is essential. And Chile has the largest lithium reserves in the world. And that requires an instrument that will give it long-term stability to its mining. It could be a concession, it could be a special duration contract, but the thing is, the state would provide the legal groundwork to lead to the investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars in lithium projects. In the north of Chile, something like 70% of the land belongs to the government. So that is our major energy potential: wind energy, solar energy, the main mining potential. There's a coast where you can desalinate water. So all of these potentials require a lot of investment, and that requires public-private collaboration because the state has to give permission to use those coasts or use those lands. So what I'm saying is everyone has something to contribute. The private partner makes the investment, it assumes some of the risk, and the state establishes the entrepreneurial conditions for that investment to happen. And often we get confused because the state wants to take on a more private role, and perhaps that stands in the way of engaging the private sector. Also, and this is just a final comment having to do with the IDB's role, and that's something Felipe was saying, this is a long-term effort. It requires regulations, and it would be good to have something like the IDB with technical knowledge that could be a good forum to discuss regulatory changes and a normative framework required by these large projects so they can be undertaken. So there could be, for example, an agreement between Fundación Chile and IDB Lab because there exists a potential to generate services and a system, an ecosystem, because we have to bring together the government, the private sector, and a third key player, which is academia. Often in our region, academia doesn't get involved. That would be the case of forestry, for example, or the paper industry. I'm thinking about Finland, and there they have a lot of technological innovations, and it's because of their major forest enterprises. So it would be good if the University of Northern Chile could have an important presence in the mining industry. Or in the south of Chile, they're raising salmon. So hopefully there could be a closer relationship between academia and the salmon industry. So it should be academia plus the public and the private sector. And I think that large organizations like the IDB have a place too. Thank you, Bernardo. Felipe? Yes, Anabel. I am going to suggest 3 areas for collaboration, 3 different areas. And first, integration. I am certain that the private sector is going to respond to integration, but there is a lot that has to be done by the governments. For example, you mentioned regulations. That is a concrete area where the private sector cannot do that job. Now, the private sector is going to make investment. There will be greater capital flow across country borders, and that is good. Secondly, opening up external markets, because you have to realize one thing, and I held in my presentation that we should increase regional integration. But in our region, no matter how integrated we may be, we cannot replace the rest of the world as a market. We have to be clear on that. We can be more attractive, but the large trade partners are outside of this region. That's a fact. So by opening up markets, and let me give you a specific market. Chile right now has the largest free trade agreements in the world with 65 different markets. We have an agreement with India. They have 450 million in population, and India is growing 2 points more than China every year, and it's a very closed market. So private citizens or the private sector would love to find partners. They'll find them in India, I'm sure. But for that, they need that market to open up to them. They need an open market, and that is something a private party cannot do. And then a third thing that I'm going to bring up that we haven't touched on here is the area of concession of public works. Public works continue to be public infrastructure, but granted in concession to the private sector. We in Chile in the 90s began to make concession of public works. And today, 30 years after we got started, we have something like $30 billion in investments that have been made through a concession of public works. In what? In ports, airports, also urban, interurban roads, we have prisons, we have hospitals. So there are many different areas where we can have private investment in public infrastructure. And to that end, we require regulations. If we don't have the right regulations, if we don't have the right laws, there isn't going to be an investment in concessions. And especially if there has been some case where infrastructure was affected by a change in rules, where there has been, and that whole matter of stability and the rules of the game, regulatory convergence, all of that is something that was raised in a panel on the Financial Times, and regulatory convergence came up. And so we were thinking perhaps this is time to have a regional initiative having to do with regulatory convergence. So perhaps we'll hear more about that issue. Now I have some questions from the audience. We have Ruth Sublum from SB Solutions with the following question, and perhaps it is for Bernardo. The question is,
should be prioritized through regional cooperation to ensure data centers can remain operational and resilient in the face of external shocks such as natural disasters or energy supply disruptions?
well, the data centers. I said that our countries can be an opportunity in terms of installing them, not only for local data processing, but also for certain requirements that allow greater latency. So we could export that potential of data processing to other parts of the Americas. Of course, you have to have a protocol. That is part of the question. We need a legal framework, and that is a long-term investment, because you would have to look at a complex of data centers being installed in North America. The large tech companies are talking about $10, $15 billion. They need the real estate. They need supply of energy, perhaps desalination of water. So there has to be some sort of contract with the government so that everything will fit together. And so these operations can operate over, say, the next 20 years to make this investment profitable. Also, you need resilience protocols. You need security, make sure that always there will be electrical power supply. Just recently, we had a 10-hour blackout, and I don't know if that's something that could be dealt with by a data center. So we had a blackout that lasted 10 hours, and perhaps data centers will need autonomous energy supply. Probably they would not be connected to the electrical grid. So that is a tremendous potential that we have, and I think that, as we have said, there has to be an enabler. There has to be a regulatory framework so that that foreign investment can be sure that the investment will pay off over an extended period of time. Thank you. Also, we have another question, an interesting one, and it has to do with how could we strengthen greater integration between the Caribbean on one hand and Latin America on the other, so as to foster greater exportation of goods and services between the two regions. So perhaps I would ask you that question. I know that you have been thinking about this issue for a very long time.
The last time I was in Chile, I was here as president of JAMPRO, and I was negotiating with people in Chile and in Peru to bring fresh produce by sea to Jamaica, where we were processing it and getting it ready for supermarkets, because we had the kind of airlift with lots of empty bellies going into Europe. And so it made financial sense to bring product from here into Jamaica by sea, because we had the sea connections, and because we had the airlift, we could move that product right into the supermarkets. And at that time, we had Air Jamaica, and we also had all Montego Bay with all of our airlift there, with tourists who are coming for a week with a few bags, so they're huge planes with lots of space. So that was just something that we were negotiating at that point in time. And it worked for a while until of course, oil prices went back down and it became good enough for Chile and Peru to do this all by themselves. But I really think that there are huge opportunities when we look at the services sector, when we look at the kinds of, when we look at the disruptions that are taking place. For instance, we in Jamaica are thinking about how we can become a hub for car parts. Because when you look at trade coming into this part of the world, you're seeing Asian products coming in. Car parts are one of those big things. But how do you assemble certain kinds of activities there that can then be distributed into the region? And we're looking at dissecting trade that's happening coming from Asia into this part of the world to see how we can make a connection, how we can take our port and our hub there to be able to distribute more into this region. So we're very much dissecting trade, world trade, and looking at it in a different way. In a company that I'm associated with called White Shield, we're actually working with Brazil, and this is different. When you look at coffee coming out of Brazil, going into the Middle East, it goes to Europe first, and then it moves from Europe down to the Middle East and into Asia. What we're looking at now is direct into the Middle East from Brazil, and the costs are much better. We're doing a level of processing in the Middle East and getting the product to the market cheaper than going through Europe. So again, when you begin to dissect trade as to what's happening, there's a lot that actually happens in our traditional markets. And if we can work together to dissect those markets in a new way and look at new opportunities, I think that there's stuff that we can do together which we haven't even thought of before. And so it's kind of innovation, but it's also looking at things from a different perspective. You know, how can we do things differently? And certainly Africa being one of those places that is growing, I think for sure that we collectively could be looking at what is the possibility in Africa? How can we together actually go into that market and make a difference? So, you know, that's a wide open market as far as we can see when we look at those numbers and begin to look at, you know, who is doing what, where, and how can we do it differently?
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. I'd like to take us in another direction, but before that, I'd like to ask you, Rhoda, whether you would like to add something to the conversation based on the partnerships that Qatar has with Latin American countries.
Thank you so much. Qatar, for example, is focused on identifying opportunities on the needs of the country itself that we are delivering aid to. So one of the things that we try to focus on is gap analysis, and because you cannot put a model and deploy for the different countries. So Latin America, for each country, has its own case, and especially for a small island developing state, and specifically as well that coincide with LDCs. So different areas and different states have its own opportunities. I cannot compare, for example, what are the needs when it comes to Belize to Jamaica, for example. There are certain characteristics we always look into. We would like to always deliver development assistance in the right way as well. and collaboratively and not just implementing, because the fund, for example, focuses on collaborating with the partners who actually know the market, who actually knows the area. So looking at the Latin America, for example, we look at IDP and the different collaborators that actually focus, or CAF, for example. So we try to identify the implementers that are knowing the area and which will be actually giving the right type of assistance.
Thank you very much. Hemos conversado.
Here we have been talking about integration. Integration understood as an exchange of goods and services amongst the countries of the region. But there's another dimension, and that is cooperation amongst the countries of the region. And I wanted to give you an example of a partnership that we launched recently with IDB, and that was the Partnership for Security, Justice, and Development. And right now, it has 21 countries of the region that have joined this partnership, and it has three main goals. One, to promote cooperation amongst the countries of the region in the area of intelligence. Another has to do with institutional strengthening in the countries of the region in all of these areas. And a third dimension has to do with supporting vulnerable communities. So to make certain that people won't join organized crime. So all of this is a way in which all the countries of the region, or many of the countries of the region, are dealing with this challenge. Crime is organized, it's transnational. So this is a very interesting opportunity for the countries of the region to be able to work together so as to strengthen their own capacities to fight TCO. So I wanted to ask you about this role. Not only is it integration, it is cooperation to deal with challenges that are transnational, that definitely are cross-border. That was the example that came to mind. Obviously, there are other areas too, and there are major externalities. For example, greater security in this area. That is important to encourage investment. We're talking about legal certainty, but of course, physical safety or security is an important element. So I would just like to hear your thoughts. I'd like for you to react. How can economic cooperation help us deal with challenges that are regional in nature, but that can also have an impact at the global level? Felipe, I don't know if you would like to start off. Well, what you're raising, Annabelle, is key to our countries. You're talking about security. Personal security, we're not talking about expropriation or property rights. We're talking about personal safety or security. And in terms of organized crime, we definitely do have to, and today we know that there are multinational crime organizations. Crime is no longer organized within one country, but crime is organized. It moves. And if one country it begins to enforce their laws, the criminals move to another country. So we need to at least collaborate in the area of intelligence, but also we need to warn each other, saying, okay, these people are headed your way. And that is what is happening right now with 3 criminals that came in and killed a Venezuelan person here in Chile, apparently with support of that country. So it's different in each country, but in Chile right now we have some statistics. Let me give you one, and that is the murder rate per 100,000. We're at 6.2, slightly above 6. But 10 years ago, we were at less than 4. So there has been an increase. Now, it's not a high level compared to other countries. Some people would say, oh, you're actually doing quite well. We're at 40. We're at 50. That's what other countries may say. And of course, those are high rates. But Latin America, in some indicators, has become one of the most dangerous regions of the world in terms of personal security. Now, crime. We measure at the center where I work, which is part of the Catholic University, we measure the cost of crime and criminal activity. And we have identified something like $7 billion. That is something like 1% of GDP. So that is a very conservative figure because there are some things we can't measure. A lot of people stay home at night. They don't want to go out because they are afraid of being held up. People may be attacked when they return home. So that is absolutely essential. Cooperation at different levels in the area of crime, because this is a scourge. Now, if we combine crime plus drug trafficking, that is a very complicated combination. And since this is probably the last time that I speak, I have to tell Patricia, in terms of cooperation, we need to better educate. You look at tourists, people say, okay, let's go to the U.S., that's where all the tourists are. But in Latin America, I am a great admirer of Jamaica. I have been at Blue Mountain, Patricia, so I'm a consumer of Blue Mountain coffee, plus I have gone to the Bob Marley house, and there I hear his music. Great. Well, with that, I would like to use these final minutes to ask the panelists for a final comment on cooperation, integration in Latin America and the Caribbean. And perhaps let me start with you, Rhoda.
A reflection on this panel, please.
For me, as we always can go alone, but if we find the right partner and the collaborator, we always have more impact. And not just with the public sector, but public and private sector is really key in terms of collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bernardo?
No, pero
Well, basically, I wanted to thank you for this opportunity. This has been good to talk about integration, cooperation. Felipe mentioned several regional platforms that exist, and I think it is good to give them a new boost. I was president of SOCOFA. I worked closely with the Pacific Alliance. I have worked on entrepreneurship for a long time, and it's too bad that this has lost some oomph. So the vehicle is there. We have to fill it. We have to fill it up with issues, have all of these regulatory conversations. But I'm glad that we had this opportunity. I'm really pleased to see that the IDB is taking an active role in this. They have always been a great player, but working with different sectors, different organizations like the IDB, we have to give this a new push. I wanted to also thank the IDB for this invitation. It's important that we discuss this issue, important for the region. And my proposal would be the following. My proposal is that we set a goal and that it be time-bound, where organizations like the IDB and the CAF, they are working in collaboration, and perhaps they could take the leadership and generate, say, just like we took up that challenge of carbon neutrality by 2050, why don't we look at integration by 2050. We're not going to become an EU, but we can make significant strides. We can define goals and we can do the important work. It's a political job that needs to be done, and it is policy related. It's political. We understand that this is a challenge that crosses all the entire political spectrum. It's not an issue of the left or the right. It's important for all Latin Americans. And one that I would like to make is that we have to think of the foundation of the alliance, the partnership. It was founded by President Piñera, and that Pacific Alliance has lost some of its strength. And here I have to blame myself, amongst others. We have to have organizations that are resilient to political changes, because often there's a change in administration. And what we see is that the institutions that we've worked so hard to build up lose their strength. And for a while, we had made important strides. And I would say that right now, my impression is that it's losing some dynamism.
Very quickly follow up from what Felipe said. He gave me an opening. We didn't talk about culture, but certainly there is a huge opportunity with respect to the orange economy and culture. And culture would be an underpinning for much of the other things that we could do together. And I think that, economically, there is a huge potential there when you start talking about what cultural industries we have in common and how we could build upon them. And I think that would also be a great foundation for many other things to happen. But I'd like to endorse the other things that have been said here already. And also to thank you, Annabelle, and the IDB for the invitation to be here. This is a very important conversation, and I believe that we ought to set some goals. Certainly, I put our goals on as far as the Caribbean is concerned, on the table, but certainly want to add the one of culture and cultural industries as another big financial opportunity.
Muy bien, muchas.
That is great. I wanted to thank the panelists, thank the audience. I have taken a lot of notes on everything that has been suggested this afternoon. This is a very fruitful discussion. And on the part of the IDB, I want to convey everyone the following messages. First, we want to respond to the needs and the interests of the countries that exist in this area of integration and cooperation. And second, we want to do this by devising a common agenda. We think that this is a great opportunity to work on the agendas that join us together. And consequently, we are launching these programs, the One Caribbean, the America en el Centro, and the Caribbean Forever. So tomorrow, we are launching a new program called South Connection, and we have other partnerships, security, development. And once again, this shows our commitment, our interest in continue to share expertise, knowledge, mobilizing resources, working with the public and private sector so that we can make important headway in this area of integration and collaboration. So I want to thank the panelists and thank our audience. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos nuestros panelistas.
Thank you. I thank the panelists. I thank everyone that was part of this seminar. And here we have seen that renewed effective integration can be a powerful tool to deal with shared challenges in Latin America and the Caribbean. And what we have been talking about this during these two seminars. Also, we want to thank the audience, the people here in the room in the Estación Mapocho, and also our virtual audience. We thank everyone for the questions, and we hope that this presentation was a source of inspiration. Now, in a couple of seconds, we will project a QR code that has been present yesterday and today during all of our seminars. And with this code, you can submit your questions and thus create an important dynamic. This is something that happened yesterday, today too, so you can send your questions to the people that are part of these seminars. And it's also important to hear the opinions of those here in the room. We are streaming this presentation, and you can access it through the IDB Invest Chile 2025. And tomorrow we have speakers that will be talking about the private sector. That will be tremendously interesting. And we invite you to be with us tomorrow. If you cannot be here in person, you can see these presentations via streaming. This because